Hi, and welcome to episode 38 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
I hope you're all doing well this week. If this is the first Page One podcast you're tuning into, at the Page One podcast, we like to speak to writers of all kinds, comic book writers, authors, screenwriters, video game writers, about their writing process, how they broke into their industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. And we've got a great guest this week for you.
We do indeed. We have Adam Christopher today, who is a prolific author, over 20 books.
I think so, yeah.
Looking at his list here, and a lot of them tie-in novels, Star Wars, Elementary, lots of TV shows and film, video game tie-ins.
And video game tie-ins, which I thought is quite interesting that they're even doing that now.
I know, it seems to be, it's obviously a growing market on that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because he's a really nice guy, and the big thing that exists for him in his world of writing is the deadline. And I was very surprised to hear the tight times he has to write an entire book from scratch. And
especially that first franchise tie-in novel, Elementary, he had to write he had to write a 20,000 word synopsis over a weekend or something.
Yeah, it's insane.
But also, I thought it was really interesting. He tells us how he picks up this work. You know, it's as we've heard from our previous guests, there's an element of, you have to put in the hard graft. There's an element of luck, but there's also an element of making your own luck and taking advantage of any opportunities that come along to get these opportunities to work on things like franchise tie-ins. But he's also written a lot of original novels as well, we should say. So he talks about the differences in writing between both of those. So it's a really interesting podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. After the podcast, we'll be back with a bit more chat.
Not just chat, though.
No, we've got an exciting new thing to tell you all about. And we'll also tell you about next week's guest, which is also exciting. And we'll just play a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then after that we'll get straight into the podcast, and we'll be back at the end.
See you then.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
So, did you always want to be a writer? Was that always the goal?
Yeah, I've always written. I think I'm quite lucky because, and I don't know if this is unusual, obviously I grew up in New Zealand, I'm from New Zealand, and at primary school we had writing. They called it process writing, and this is from about the age of 6 to 10. Like, it was part of I think it was probably weekly, was part of the school day to actually write in a kind of journal, like write, fiction. And they called it process writing because, the teacher would edit it and you do revisions, and then the teacher would kind of pick the best stories of that month and they'd be published.
Oh, wow.
And by published, meaning you could write it out on nice paper with pen instead of pencil, and it goes up on the wall. Now, this is 1984 to 1988, and I don't know if that's just what happened in New Zealand schools or whether it happens primary school, or whether it happened in other schools. But whatever the case, I'm lucky because that really kind of instilled this love of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've still got some of the journals actually from those school days, which is this kind of weird mix of like Doctor Who fan fiction, pretty much what I was watching on TV at the time, which was John Pertwee stories. But so I grew up with writing, and another thing, I think I'm sort of lucky in that because I was a Doctor Who fan, growing up. And again, it's the 80s and it's New Zealand, so we're watching John Pertwee on TV, so it's like 10 years out of date. Mm-hmm. And of course, Doctor Who, the classic series, has got a very kind of literate fandom, and it's kind of, almost the era is defined by the target Doctor Who novelizations, which is all I read. Like, so from the same period at primary school, I read nothing else but Doctor Who books, much to my parents' disgust, I'm sure. And in fact, I can remember they tried to, give me Christmas or birthday, all I'd want is a big stack of Doctor Who books. And they would try to, introduce me to other stuff, or maybe they'd take me to a bookstore and say I could select anything I wanted so long as it wasn't a Doctor Who book. But they gave up in the end, and I just had lots of Doctor Who books. But again, it's this thing of, I was reading an awful lot of, kids should read and do read, but I was reading an awful lot of Doctor Who, obsessively. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of, watching that on TV, reading the Doctor Who books, and then writing at school, kind of all meshed together to kind of create, sounds a bit pompous, create me as a writer. But yeah, so it's kind of it's been always this thing in my life.
I like the idea of being told to, every day in school, sit down and spend the next half hour actually trying to write something, because that must also instill that element which I think a lot of writers struggle with now, which is forcing yourself to write, and just even when you're not in the mood for it, being like, I've got an hour right now, I'm going to try and do some writing, even if I'm not in the mood for it right now, I'll just push through it. And that's quite an important skill to get.
It is, and it's a really good, looking back on it, because I was looking at one of these old journals that I've got, being 6 years old to kind of 10 years old, it's not like I had any kind of planning or outlining or anything, because it really was, okay, now it's process writing, and it's not only writing for a sustained half hour or how long it was, but coming up with an idea. And actually, okay, you've got half an hour, you have to write something, and the entire class is doing it, and the teacher's kind of waiting. So, and again, although it's a lot of Doctor Who stuff in those old journals, there's ghost stories and kind of adventure stories. It's basically, it's like training for that kind of discipline.
Exactly.
Of getting an idea and then actually just writing it.
It's yet another example of why New Zealand seems to be the best country in the world at the moment.
Well, what can I say?
With that as your grounding, when did you sort of get serious about writing? When did you start to say, right, this is what I'm going to do?
I kind of continued in high school, and I remember in high school I had stuff appear in the yearbook, and it would often appear without them telling me, which is you'd write a story for English, and then I went to university and it kind of dropped away, but it was always kind of gnawing at me that I needed to be doing something, and it was kind of, I moved to the UK in 2006, and I remember right at that same time, so I'd left university by then, right at the same time, there was a UK publisher that had opened, they had open submissions, so you didn't need an agent or you didn't need to be published or anything. So you could send them a proposal. So right in the middle of this moving across the world, I wrote up a kind of proposal and sent it to them. And of course, I was convinced that it was brilliant and that they would instantly buy it. And, I'd arrive and I'd have, I'd get to write a book and it'd just be the start of everything and, dead easy. And of course it was, I don't know, a few months later it was rejected because, it was terrible. This is the thing, I had not written anything of any length for years, but I thought of myself as a writer. I mean, I'm a writer without actually doing any writing, which is probably not an uncommon thing for some people to kind of do. But it was interesting because that was like, it was a good experience in a way because that was the turning point. It was like, oh, okay, if I'm going to be a published writer, if I'm going to do writing as make a living out of writing, because I love doing it, I actually have to take it seriously. So I actually have to sit down and do the work and keep working at it until something happens. Because as a writing is a kind of, not just as a kind of, it's a job, it pays the bills, but like it's a skill that you have to, work on. Like anything creative. Like you can't just go in unless you're some kind of genius. So you have to work on it. So it's like, okay, fine. It was interesting. It's like a little switch in my brain kind of went. I was like, oh, okay, right. Yes, let's take it seriously. So that experience, even though it was kind of just looking back on it, quite a hilarious sort of expectation that I had, was it. So from then, let's see, that's like 2006. So yeah, I just started writing, and I knew I had to write, could I even write a novel-length piece of fiction? I've written short stories and all kinds of stuff. And also, actually, I should say, while I was at university and sort of high school, I still wrote a lot of Doctor Who fan fiction, which was sort of published in, the New Zealand Doctor Who fan club fanzine. So I was still writing little bits and pieces, but like a novel-length fiction was, could I even do it?
Yeah.
So from that kind of big rejection, I thought, okay, I need to write a novel. So I wrote a novel, and again, this was 2006, 7, 8. That novel was complete trash, but but I went in with the expectation that yes, it was going to be rubbish. Like what my aim was, can I write a novel-length piece of fiction, which is a heck of a lot longer than a short story?
Yeah.
So yes, I wrote 120,000 words of a really terrible novel, but it's like, okay, I can do it.
Yeah, the stamina's there. You can piece it together. You can plan it all, etc. Yeah.
And also, again, going back to the whole thing you said about the kind of discipline of it, it was like, well, having moved to the UK and I was working, full time, I had to then learn how to schedule myself and carve out time and have that discipline to keep going. And especially, when you're starting out, you do it without any expectation of something happening. You just kind of have to persevere.
Yeah.
So again, it was like finding the time and like this kind of self-discipline.
I mean, I suppose one question there is, and it's something that everyone probably faces as a writer, which is, you'd sent off this first novel, it had been rejected. You'd written something else which you yourself decided wasn't great. But what kept you going? What was the belief that you had that said, I know this hasn't worked yet, but this is something that I think is going to work?
I guess I thought I had something, and this is again going right back to primary school. Like, my stories were the ones that were always published each month. Just written out in nice handwriting. My stories mysteriously appear in the high school yearbook without them telling me because the English teacher liked it. So and again, the Doctor Who fan fiction that I wrote, not all of it, but it started to get published in the fanzines more and more. So I enjoyed doing it, and I thought there's something there that there's something there that I need to work on because I'm not good enough. So that's kind of what kept me going. And it's funny looking back on it. I wrote the first full-length novel, and it was like a kind of proof of concept that I could do it. And then I wrote another one, and then I wrote 3 kind of back to back, and I felt that each one got better because I knew that I had to kind of put in the time. but I'm also like, I'm quite persistent with things. I kind of wanted to do it, and I wanted to do it seriously. And I thought, if I'm going to do it seriously, you've got to just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Knowing full well, because also at that time, when I was writing the first one, I started going to science fiction conventions in the UK, and learning about the industry and how it all works, and absolutely knowing that I kind of considered it's pretty much impossible to get published. Like, getting an agent is impossible, being published is impossible. But then I'd go to things like EasterCon, which is the UK's annual science fiction convention, and it's a hotel full of published authors. So like, it's impossible, but at the same time, people do it.
Yeah.
So I kind of aimed for that impossible goal.
And your first book was Empire State. Am I right in saying that was your first one out?
Yeah, that was the first one.
And that's a kind of noiry superhero kind of feel to it, which I think is probably, or was it an area that you like to write in? How did you get into that first book then? How did you get that? How did you make that first book happen?
So Empire State was the third book that I'd written. And it was the first one where I thought, there's something in it. And in fact, I was a member of a writing group in Manchester, the science fiction fantasy one. And, writing groups, you critique everybody else's work, and you provide notes and stuff. And when I did the first couple of chapters of Empire State, and the notes that came back were amazing. And it's kind of okay, there is something in that. And, that's kind of that's the book that has my first chance at being published, because it's good enough. But yeah, so it's kind of, I was into, I like, as well as science fiction and fantasy, I like comics, and I like sort of crime fiction, and period stuff. I'm fascinated by New York and the Prohibition era and the kind of pulpy noir thing. So in superhero comics, so it all kind of crashed together in Empire State. Just this mangle of all the things that I liked at the time, all together. Which is and I remember enjoying the process of writing it. So clearly that was a good idea that my brain had come up with. But yeah, so that was the third one I'd written. And I submitted that. So I'd met an editor on Twitter, Lee Harris, who was the editor at Angry Robot Books. So I'd joined Twitter a couple of years before, but again, it wasn't because I was trying to be a writer and to use Twitter to promote myself or books or anything. I joined Twitter because, being a kind of geeky person, I liked hanging out with people that liked comics and science fiction, comics, superheroes and things. So, Lee and I shared quite a lot of interests, so we became friends online. And he knew that, because obviously I was tweeting about writing, so he knew I was doing something. And then I was actually they were based in Nottingham at the time, and I was actually in Nottingham for something else. And I said, can I come and visit the office? So him and Marco Gascoigne, who was the publisher, we went out to lunch, and we're just talking about stuff. And then they go, okay, so what's this book you've been secretly writing? Not so secretly writing. So I kind of, unprepared, totally unprepared.
Yeah.
I just kind of garbled this elevator pitch, which was really horrible. But they go, oh yeah, well, when you think it's ready, we'll have a look.
Oh wow,
brilliant!
Fantastic! That's a great opportunity.
Well, that's the thing. It's so I knew the people, and I liked Angry Robot Books, and I felt even that my book was the right kind of thing for their kind of subgenre. They did a lot of genre mixing and things. And of course I was, I didn't have an agent. The book was kind of done, but I needed to revise it. But it was good because they told me, they said, when it's ready, we'll have a look. And I kind of took that to heart, when it's ready.
Yeah.
So I didn't rush home and just send it off. I thought, okay, I need to make sure, because it's a really good, I knew it was a good opportunity, and that publishers don't take unagented writers very often. So then they took that, and then we got the call on my birthday, 3 months later or something, and they said that they'd buy that one and they wanted one more. and I actually sold them the two together, and it was Empire State and Seven Wonders.
Right.
And Seven Wonders was actually the second novel I'd written. So I'd written it
Oh, right.
before Empire State. But again, it was complete in a version that I knew I could revise. That very first novel, which is still locked away safely, is complete nonsense. I learned a great deal from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You force yourself to write 120,000 words. You learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So Seven Wonders, even though it needed a lot of work, was exponentially better than the first one, and then Empire State was better again. So they brought the two together.
Brilliant.
And that was out. Yeah, that was it.
I mean, it's amazing that the number of authors that we've spoken to that, if you pick up the Writer's Artist Yearbook or look online, how do I get published? There is a very set thing of, right, go through find the agents that like what you do, send off the 3 chapters with a letter that's very polished, blah, 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 blah. And this is the thing that's repeated.
Yeah.
And yet, so many of the authors that we've spoken to have got into publishing in a very different way. It's incredible.
Yeah, often no two tales are the same. It's there's an element of luck to it, but there's an element of making your own luck and getting yourself in the position to actually to be able to meet people. Going on to Twitter, making friends with the person. Laying the groundwork.
See, this is the thing about getting published. It's like it's the right place at the right time, but you can get yourself to the right place
exactly
by doing the work, and then the opportunity, if you kind of set yourself up, the opportunity comes along. So it's like, yes, there's an element of luck, but there's also, and I remember this is ages ago, I went to a convention, like the comics convention, like 2008, long before I'd even, committed myself to kind of writing properly. Mm-hmm. But Paul Cornell, who's obviously written Doctor Who and comics and novels and things, he was on this panel before I kind of knew him, and he said, it's lots of, getting published is about lots of little opportunities, and what you need to do is look out for the tiny, tiny microscopic opportunities that are like little cracks in the door, and if you can kind of keep going for those as you go along, then you kind of you might get somewhere. So the whole thing about this kind of standard format of as you said, you list your agents, you query them in your query letter and your sample chapters and all this kind of stuff, and you have query trackers and you can do all this research. Like, that's absolutely the right thing to do, and it's great discipline for kind of organizing yourself as a professional writer. And it is also it's giving you those tools and that mindset that gets you to that right place. Mm-hmm. So in the course of doing all that, yes, opportunities may come up. And it's, because it's funny you said that, because I probably don't know any of my author friends who have got in that traditional way of doing a query letter and then getting an agent, and then, and I went in, I sold 2 books without an agent, which is like absolutely the wrong thing to do, and you should never, ever, ever do it. Except it kind of worked out for me, because I'd sold these 2 books and they were announced in the kind of industry press. And I started getting loads of queries about movie rights and TV rights and all these kind of things. And I knew then that, okay, I really needed an agent to kind of handle all this, because that's part of what they do. So I had a friend, Chuck Wendig, who I didn't know his agent, but I said, can I just ask your agent some questions? Just general questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, what do you do? How do you get an agent? What are all these people who are like contacting me? So he introduced me to her, to Stacia Decker, and she answered my questions and then said, oh, what was that book that you sold to Angry Robot? Can I take a look? Just, this is like Friday night.
Yeah.
UK time. I was like, yeah, okay, I sent it off. And then like a couple of hours later, she came back saying, I can represent you because this is a really great book. And
oh, wow. That might be the fastest send off to please sign with me I've ever heard. That's fantastic.
But in the end, I wasn't even querying her or anything. She was like, never even occurred to me that like that would happen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it did. So that was a Friday night to remember.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And
but it's like, although I did it the wrong way around, never ever sell a book without an agent, I wouldn't have, if I hadn't done it that way, I wouldn't have met her and got her as my agent. And as it happens, she's like the perfect agent for me.
Yeah,
so again, I kind of
everything's sort of fallen into place because of the route you've taken. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And since those books, you've written, you've sort of created some series of books. So you've got the Ray Electromatic series, and you've got Spider Wars and things like that. And they're also, especially the Ray Electromatic ones, are this unusual, but for me personally speaking, a very cool sort of mashup of genres, as you say. This mixing the noir with sort of period and a robot detective and things like that. So, is that just the sort of story that you've always been interested in, or why do you play in that sort of sandpit?
Yeah, it's funny because almost Empire State was like a trial run for the Ray Electromatic mysteries. It's almost like I was getting it out of my system with those books. The Ray Electromatic mysteries was not a series that I actually intended to write as a series of books. I did because I had the two space operas, sort of horror space opera, which is the Spider Wars series, with Tor books. And I'd written a novelette, which is that kind of weird, not a novella, not a novel length thing for Tor.com, which is Brisk Money, which is the first Ray Electromatic story, which is basically just an origin story, but it's self-contained, kind of comes to an end. And the editor of that, Paul Stevens, who was the editor of the Spider Wars series, kind of said, this is a really good idea for a series of books.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, okay, sure. Of course it is. So I emailed, so he said, I think, this is just the weird thing of how it happens. It's like, what can you, what would happen in 3 books?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I don't even want a synopsis. I want just like imagine you're writing the back cover blurbs for these 3 books. I want to be surprised and not know what's happening, which is like not how editors work. Do you know what I mean? So I did that, and he's like, so then he signed me up for a trilogy of novels based on this short story.
And so at that point you've got your 3-book deal, and how do you start planning all that? Do you kind of say, I want to focus on one book, make this the best book it can be, put everything into it, and then have some time away from that, have a think and see where I can take it? Or do you have to say, no, here's the 3 books, here's the plot through all of them, and I need to save some stuff, which I'll knowingly save stuff in the book 2 and 3?
I think, you do have to do some of that because, when a publisher buys more than one book, they do want to know what's happening.
Okay.
Although that was unusual, but because it was like back cover blurbs. But I did kind of have to, they had to know what was happening. So it was definitely planned as 3 with an overarching story. But I also wanted to make sure that each book was sort of, readable on its own.
Yeah.
Because series are difficult because, no matter what happens, half as many people buy the second book as they bought the first. And it kind of goes on. Unless you can, get a, kind of breakout bestseller kind of thing. But also it's important, and this is sort of writing in general, it's like, don't save anything.
Mm-hmm.
People writers I talk to, and they're like, I've got this really great idea, but I really want to write this other book first, and this really amazing idea, I should save it for book 2 because it's going to be awesome. And if it fits book 2, fine, but don't get into a habit of saving cool stuff and saving ideas, because ideas are kind of infinite and free, and there'll always be a better idea coming. Yeah. You'll get a better idea next year, and you'll get a better idea in 20 years.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely no point. And every book that you write, like, it has to be the very best book that you've ever written. So even if you've got 3 books, I as I was writing the 3, each one I definitely kind of focused on individually. So Made to Kill, which is the first one, like, this is going to be the best book I've written. And then when that was all done and dusted, second book, it's like, this book is going to be the best book I've ever written. That's just a kind of, mentality and kind of mindset.
Yeah,
working on it.
I think you have to have that belief. I mean, you never want to go into it saying, this one won't be as
Well,
good, but
yeah,
I'll keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and it's like, yeah, if you're not putting 100% into it, then like people are going to see that when
Yeah.
they read
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And if
I
you're
think-
holding stuff back and saving ideas, then you're always going to be focusing on what that next thing is, which is going to be amazing, not what you're actually doing.
Exactly.
As if what you're doing is like, as you said, it's kind of, just send it off.
Yeah. And I think people can always tell when when they're reading something and they're like, this is okay, but it feels like it's set up for this next big idea, or it feels like his heart wasn't really in it because he was really wanting to write this next book. And as you say, if you have as many readers as you go down a chain, you don't want to be saving your best idea for book 3 when we've got a quarter of people who are left.
Yeah.
You want maximum impact.
Yeah. In a sporting analogy, which Tarek won't like, it's kind of like a football penalty shootout when you're saving your best player for the last penalty and you might never get there, so the game can already be lost, so you need to put what you can in there. You've also done a lot of franchise tie-in books, which I suppose goes back to the idea of what you were saying when you were younger. You loved reading the Doctor Who books and things like that. I mean, how did you get into writing those tie-ins?
I'd always wanted to write tie-ins because, as you said, I'd kind of grown up with Doctor Who books, so I never thought of them as being any kind of lesser kind of book, which sometimes they do have that kind of stigma, it's just a tie-in or whatever. So I'd hoped that the opportunity would come along sometime, but it's definitely this. I knew it's not something that you really work towards because it's difficult to get tie-in work for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure we'll come to. So I was focusing on original work, but the first ones I wrote was for Elementary, the TV series, which is that Johnny Lee Miller, Lucy Liu, Sherlock Holmes version. And it was only because Titan, my UK publisher, had bought the 2 space opera books, the ones that went from Tor in the US. And I went down, as you do, to meet the editor and have lunch and, isn't it wonderful, and toast our success and it's going to be fantastic. And in the middle of all that, they were talking about Elementary, just kind of between themselves. And I was like, oh, you're doing Elementary books? Because I love Elementary. It's like my favorite show. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're doing Elementary books. And but they're all they're tied up and we've got the author done and, it's all under control and handled. And I was like, oh, okay. It's okay. Fine. That's fine.
You like that?
And then it must have been 6 weeks later, maybe longer, I got an email from my agent to say, because obviously, as you do with agents, you tell them what's going on and what you've been doing. And so I kind of had reported back and forgotten about it. Still bitter inside that, I couldn't do an Elementary novel. So 6 weeks later, I get this email saying, do you still want to do Elementary? Because things have gone crazy and, the schedule's changed and the requirements have changed and it's all kind of a bit chaotic. And they need a book in 3 weeks.
3 weeks?
3 weeks.
Jeez.
Wow.
So, and again, we'll come to this, I'm sure. Licensed work is a very peculiar relationship with deadlines and things. So what they needed really was someone who, because it was such a tight deadline, who knew the show inside out and back to front, and that they could just trust to write a tie-in book. Use the characters, use the world, have an understanding of those to produce something which is an Elementary story. So I had to do like an audition chapter, which was the first. So I did a synopsis, which was massive. It was like 20,000 words, and the book itself is only 80,000 words. So it's like a quarter of the length.
But where did the idea for this come? When you had to write the synopsis, did you have an idea already? Did they come to you and say it needs to be about this?
Well, no. So, and this is the thing about like how you kind of you train yourself as a writer. I had to write an Elementary story and had to fit in within the season. And I think it was like season 1 or 2 at the time. It had to be self-contained, so like you could just slot it in as like one of those, just an episode, and that was it. So I was like, okay, I got over a weekend. I had to come up with a 20,000 word synopsis.
Jeez.
And this is the thing. It's like, well, someone hires you to write something. You don't wait for the muse to strike
Yeah.
and for inspiration to descend upon you. Like, you're like, okay, elementary. What's it about? Well, there's a mystery. Okay, there's a murder. Great. What's that kind of weird elementary style twisty murder thing? And I kind of wrote it over a weekend. And the audition chapter was the first chapter, and it had to include Sherlock Holmes and Watson, so that CBS, which is a TV network that makes elementary, so they could see that I understood the characters and how they, how they exist. So once they were happy with that, they kind of signed me up, and I wrote 2 books, which is like, this is interesting because this is the dream. This is a tie-in book because having grown up with Doctor Who books,
Yeah.
I was now in the realms of my favorite authors like Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke and all those Doctor Who writers who wrote Doctor Who books. Plus, I got 2 novels that have got Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu on the cover, which is like something I never dreamed would happen.
Yeah. And you've written Sherlock Holmes stories as well, which is something.
And the Sherlock Holmes stories. Yeah. It was like a confluence.
And it's another example of, in some ways it was right place, right time, but you had to make the most of that. Or the fact you were in that room and making clue to them. I like the show. I know it very well.
Yeah.
You grab that chance and you run with it.
Again, it was one of these weird. It's a stroke of luck and an opportunity that came along, and if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have got them. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't seek it out, but I liked Elementary by coincidence, and I knew that Titan did lots of licensed books, and it just happened that they were having problems with it, and they were talking about it, and I kind of butted in, and then someone remembered me.
Brilliant.
So yeah, and then on the back of that, I did 3 novels for a video game series called Dishonored.
Yeah.
It's the same publisher, so because I'd done Elementary, they're like, okay, well, here's someone that can do tie-in work. So I did a trilogy, and this goes to the thing about licensed and tie-in fiction. Again, you don't start out doing tie-in fiction because it's a kind of strange sort of job. You've got very tight deadlines. You've often got very specific briefs about what is needed because it has to fit in with a larger kind of program of stuff. You have to not only be able to write a kind of coherent, entertaining, novel-length piece of fiction, which is actually quite hard, but it has to fit in with the universe that you're writing.
Yeah.
Using characters that not only already exist, but in some cases people absolutely love.
Yeah. So
you've kind of got this responsibility to get it absolutely right. Otherwise, people are going to be unhappy with you. So that's why tie-in work and license work it's difficult because you've got all these requirements on top of the fact that you're actually having to write a whole novel, which itself is quite a big job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, it's one of those things where you don't start doing it because you have to be able to demonstrate that you can write a book to deadline. I already had a kind of backlist of novels that had been published, so they knew I could write a book, and I could meet deadlines, and I could follow direction. And this is also a thing. It's like tie-in work is not for every author because of these specific requirements. It happened that I could write an Elementary novel in 3 weeks, which sounds, crazy. But at a push, I could do it. But not everyone can do that.
And it sounds like the Elementary one was a particularly tight deadline. But do these other tie-ins? Do you have longer deadlines, or are they all on a very short leash like that?
Yeah, that was particularly unusual. Normally, you probably got about 2 months to write the draft, which is, still quite short, 8 weeks or so. Sometimes, 6 weeks. I think I did the Stranger Things novel that was 7 weeks, just the first draft.
And why is it so short for, I get that if it's a show, especially a show that's ongoing, that's on the air, that, you want to get it out before something happens in the show that means the book won't fit in anymore, and there's obviously that kind of element. But why, something like the video game stories that you've written, why do they need to be Why are they so tight? Why can't you say it takes 6 months?
I think there's two reasons. The first one is that the licensor, so the people that own the property, no matter what it is, if it's film, TV, video game, they have their own program of stuff. So like the video game stuff is kind of maybe a bit different, but like with Elementary, like their primary thing was getting the episodes of Elementary made and out on time. And, they wanted, I don't know, there was like an art book and there was the 2 novels. Or you take another, like Stranger Things, there was a behind the scenes book, there was another novel, there was a YA novel. Star Wars is even more complicated because you got comics and toys and audio and everything. So all of this stuff, the licensor kind of plans, and they don't plan it 2 years in advance like you would for like an original novel. It's like, well, this year we're doing this, so we want to have a book out in December. So they go to their license holder, whether Titan was for Elementary and Dishonored, and they're like, okay, these are the requirements. So there's that kind of thing. It just has to fit into their kind of marketing and sales program. So you are a small cog in a larger sort of machine. The other thing is that so many people are involved with a tie-in book. So many people have got their eyes on the project. Yeah. So like if you do a normal, original novel, you write it, and there's the editor, and then later on you got the copy editor and you got the marketing people. But with a licensed book, it's like, okay, there's you and the editor, and then there's the contact you have with the licensor. Then there's, like with Stranger Things, one of the staff writers was kind of the supervisor, and then there's the showrunners and the producers, and then they have got on the net, like with Elementary, it was CBS, and with Stranger Things, it was Netflix. But there's executives on that kind of Netflix or CBS side who have to look at things, and all these people have to approve it and read it, approve it, sign off on it, suggest changes, and the changes can be for story reasons, or they can be because you accidentally guess a plot line coming up, and you have to kind of adjust things. So from a purely kind of logistical point of view, because there are so many people looking at what you're doing, all of that takes time, and you have to condense it down, otherwise you'd kind of never get it done. So it's purely practical.
And is the process therefore a lot different in terms of how you approach it and plan it and all of this sort of stuff? Is that a different process you have for these tie-in novels as opposed to your original novel?
I think, at the beginning there's definitely more planning. They require very detailed outlines. Not as detailed as that 20,000 word opus that I wrote for Elementary, but again, because there are so many people that need to look at it and approve it and make sure it fits in, that as much, if you can get as much detail as possible into that outline, then everybody is happy and everybody knows what you're doing. And then actually that helps, of course, because when it comes to the drafting of the actual manuscript, you've got a really strong structure which you can follow. Which is, even though you put all that work in at the beginning, it really does pay off. So so there's much more involvement on that outline side before you even start writing. That's an outline will go through several passes, rounds of revision and things with comments coming in, and you kind of adjust. And sometimes, you can get to 5th or 6th revision of the outline, and it's quite different to where you started from. But again, this is the thing of the way they choose people to do tie-ins. It's like you've got to be able to take in all that commentary and revisions and notes, because you are crafting a story for them that has to fit with what they want.
And what's your favorite? If you've kind of done both, you've written the tie-in stuff and you've done your own original work. And what do you prefer? Do you prefer, is there something quite fun about being handed the toys in the sandbox and playing with them and then put them back, or is it more fun but more work to have to create everything from scratch? What would you choose?
I like both of them, and they are both very different. So absolutely, because I'm this kind of, I'm a geeky science fiction fan, to be able to write in someone else's universe is kind of brilliant. Something like Stranger Things was such a complete joy to work on. because I'm a fan of Stranger Things.
Mm-hmm.
When you do your own original stuff, it's interesting because having done quite a lot of tie-in stuff kind of all together, I did Dishonored 3 books, and then I did Stranger Things kind of all back to back. When I went back to whatever it was I was working on of my own, I was like, oh, I'm on my own now. And it's like, I'm just writing this thing, and nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows the characters or the story.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking, well, I hope people like it because it's quite a lot of work, and I really like it. And
I
you do get that kind of... No, go on.
No, it's a whole different market, isn't it? Because you can, there's folk who will buy a book based on the Stranger Things universe because they like that kind of universe. But as you say, you're having to create this whole thing yourself, and no one knows about it.
Well, and absolutely. Like, I'm under no illusion that the people bought a Stranger Things novel because it was a Stranger Things novel. Nothing to do with the fact that I wrote it. If they enjoyed it and then discovered me as an author and went on to read some of my other stuff, that's great. But that's not why I write tie-ins, because it's a tiny, tiny proportion of people that would ever do that. So my job as writing a tie-in novel is to write something that's true to the property and that people are going to enjoy. Nothing more than that. So I kind of keep the streams separate, if you know what I mean. It's like there's tie-ins and there's the original, and they're two different things, and they don't really overlap very much. So but like I enjoy doing both. It's nice to do one then the other, otherwise you get kind of tangled up in, because it's a different type of writing and it requires a different kind of mindset. It's good for me to kind of reset myself, do a tie-in and then back to my own stuff. And again, with your own stuff, you've got the luxury of time. Deadlines are usually way longer and way more flexibility, obviously because it's your own creation. And really, if you've got a really good editor, you're developing it when it comes to the edit process. You're developing it together, and it's this really cool creative process, rather than just being told kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And from the point of view of being obviously a fan of these tie-in, the worlds that the tie-ins are set in and stuff, it must be quite good being on the inside of that. You do work Star Wars as well and stuff like that, so getting in on the inside of that and maybe understanding their grander plan and stuff, which I'm not going to ask you about, but that must be, from the point of view of a fan, quite good fun as well.
Oh yeah, this is the thing. It's like like tie-in is not fan fiction. There is a distinction between fan fiction and tie-in fiction, but it really does help if you're a fan. Because especially with Elementary, Elementary was such a large, it's a mainstream network TV show in the States. So there's a huge amount of people working on it. And, I knew more about the show than most people working on it, which is not a negative comment on them. It's because me as a fan, I was diving way deeper into the kind of mythology of the show. And I think they took my notes and kind of incorporated them into their kind of show Bible because it was useful for them. So that's kind of cool, that's the indulging the kind of fan side. Although I don't know if I'm disappointed or not, but like they really don't tell you anything, sure, absolutely, you find out stuff and you because you have to, to a certain extent, but Stranger Things was like, I wrote that novel before season 3 had shown. And I had to kind of tie it into season 3 because it's set between 2 and 3, and like trying to get information out of them about what happens in season 3 was just impossible. All they'd say was like, I'd have to suggest something and they'd say, yes, you can do that. Or no, you can't do that. Like, and from that I had to kind of piece together some clues about what was going on.
It sounds like such a strange writing process because you're trying to create something original that fits in with something that already exists, and you want to help build the hype up for season 3. You want to lead in, build into it in some way, but they're not telling you what's going on, and you're kind of writing blindfolded, and you're asking yes, no questions without the context, and it sounds like such a completely different type of writing, as you say, to your own stuff, where you can flesh it out and you and the editor work, and it's amazing how separate it is.
And it is, and it's like that's not to say that the Stranger Things novel is not an an original novel, of my creation, my
Of course.
story, but you have to take all that kind of stuff into consideration.
Yeah.
And sort of going back to that kind of indulging the geeky side of it, if I could sneak stuff in, even tiny stuff that linked directly to stuff that we see on TV, then that kind of satisfied that itch that I had. In Stranger Things, the show, Hopper's first wife, we don't know much about her, so I gave her a job. She's an elementary school teacher, which is that. So that's now official Stranger Things kind of canon.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
And at the beginning of season 3, 11 has a walkie-talkie to communicate with her friends. So I had given her that walkie-talkie in the book.
Oh, that's very cool.
So she like, but that's tiny. Like, it doesn't mean anything. But it's still kind of cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've kind of added to it. Exactly. No, I like that a lot. Absolutely.
And you've written a lot of books, but do you ever suffer from writer's block or anything like that? Which, if you were writing a tie-in novel, it sounds like could be a disaster in terms of the timeline. Type
Spent 2 weeks not knowing what to write.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you just don't. Yeah, well, deadlines are really good motivators, and it's really good. I actually work quite well under pressure, which is probably why I enjoy tie-ins quite a lot, because you have to do it, But I kind of, although it sounds a bit weird and maybe detracts from the kind of artistic, creative side of it, but like when it comes down to the crunch, I kind of have to consider it as a job. So like, you don't turn up to your day job and kind of not do anything. Think, I don't feel like it, or I don't know what to do, or I'm sitting at my office desk waiting for inspiration. Like, no, you have a job to do. And sure, you have up days and you have down days and all that kind of stuff, but it's the same kind of thing. It's just that kind of discipline and work ethic. And I do enjoy writing, so it's not difficult to summon that willpower to write. Having said that, absolutely, I've had writer's block. I've also, I had burnout, because I did the three Dishonored novels back to back.
Yeah.
And I was I'd had it for like 6 months because there was a lot of pressure and a lot of time, a lot of short space of time, and my brain needed a rest.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to actually figure that out, because I'd be trying to do stuff and it was like, getting blood out of a stone kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, hang on a second, maybe I should actually just stop for and have a rest and regroup.
I mean, so many people put out, one book every year, one book every 2 years. It sounds like there was a period where you were putting out a number of books in really rapid succession. That is tiring. It's tiring writing, and to do that, sustained pressure with deadlines, etc. That tight must have been, pretty hard.
And again, it happened because it was tie-in books, because they were all together. Normally I wouldn't really want to do more than one original novel a year, and that's also not just because of from your own kind of mental health and point of view, but even I'm a huge fan of Stephen King, but I am not up to date with his output, because like he does a book a year. Sometimes he does a book every 9 months, and like even for an ardent fan, that can be. You just lose track. It's just too much.
And they're pretty big books as well. Quite weighty tomes sometimes.
That's
how does he do so fast?
I don't know how he does that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's funny actually, though, because we've spoken to a couple of people who self-publish, and that's their career path in writing. And it's interesting because it's kind of the opposite for them, because they say they need to have new stuff coming out a lot to stay in the mind of the people that get their books. So I think they've got, even every 5 months or something, they'll have something new coming out, because if they leave it too long, then the people will have moved on and gone on elsewhere. But I suppose that is one of the differences between sort of traditional publishing and self-publishing.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done some comics as well, and that's the same kind of thing. Like, it's a useful thing to kind of keep bubbling away at something that kind of crops up at more regular intervals, so people kind of are aware of what's going on and what you're doing. And certainly with self-publishing, because you need to keep your momentum going, because it's just you as a, as a thing to kind of just you've got to get your name out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, looking at I was looking back on it, like my last original novel was out like in 2017,
Mm-hmm.
which was the last one of the Ray Dramatic series.
Yeah.
And then I've been busy with tie-in work. So in a way, the tie-in work kind of fulfills that thing of keeping me going and kind of having stuff out there while I'm writing whatever my next book is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that time to work on your own stuff, but not that. But the pressure's off a little bit because your name's still out there. You still get
because I've got and because tie-in books are in a very condensed time frame. You know, it's if I can get one in, you know, between something else, that's actually quite good.
Yeah. And as you say, you've done some work in the comic world. Chuck Wendig, you wrote one with The Shield.
Yep,
it was called.
That's right.
And is that something you'd like to do more of? Is it quite a nice change again, like kind of away from the novel side of things?
Comics is interesting because like I'm a comics reader and a comics fan, but writing comics it's a very difficult industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very difficult to get into, and it's a lot of work for. And again, this is this horrible business side. It's a lot of work for relatively little return.
Yeah.
So you do it because you want to do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And because you love comics, and I do love comics, but it's like I need, you know, the amount of work when I've got other books due. It's and it's this thing of again of like if opportunities come along, then absolutely. So I did those 4 issues of The Shield with Chuck, and then last year or this year? Last year. Time has taken on a new meaning. So last year I did a Star Wars comic, was a backup and an issue of Star Wars Adventures. So just an 8-page story.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, 8 pages, you know, you can fit it in around your other deadlines. And it's a fun thing because obviously I love Star Wars and I love comics. So I could kind of do that and be really happy with how it came out. And again, if something comes along, then sure.
Yeah.
I'll have a look.
And I suppose is doing a smaller kind of 8-issue script quite a nice way to dip your toe in the water a little bit, get yourself known in the comic world without taking on a massive 6-issue series or whatever.
Yeah, and again, because it's a different kind of writing.
Yeah.
You know, I actually found because comics is telling a story in a short amount of pages, mostly through dialogue. Now, obviously, comics is writing and art, but in terms of on the writing side, it's all dialogue.
Yeah.
Gone are the days of captions and thought bubbles and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that actually really helped me when it came to prose, in terms of like really honing my dialogue skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of useful from that point of view as well.
Cool.
And it's we've spoken to some comic writers as well, and I suppose the other major difference would be it's a much more collaborative process with the artist as well. So the story can develop. You're both developing the story as opposed to you on your own, kind of a thing. I mean, did you co-write The Shield with Chuck, or?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you co-written other stuff, and do you enjoy writing with someone else?
I haven't actually done any other co-writing. The thing with doing The Shield was that Chuck and I have very different writing styles. Well, writing styles, but also we write different kinds of books, like completely different kind of books. And that's actually why I think it worked so well, because I would write stuff that he never could write, and he would write stuff that I could never write. And then when you put those two together, you come up with this other thing, which is new. And the way we did it with the 4 issues is that one of us would write the first draft, and then the other person would edit, and then go back and forth, and then would swap over for the next issue. So by the time you've gone through 4 or 5 exchanges of edits, you couldn't remember who had written what. So it became this kind of new thing. So yeah, I'd definitely be up for doing a collaboration again, and I think it would have to be with someone again who is a different kind of writer. Because if it was the same kind of writer, I don't know why you'd be wondering why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose you always want the strength of someone else whose work is kind of different than yours, and as long as you work well together, you complement each other, you kind of you get the best of both of you. I suppose. Yeah.
Otherwise, there'd be no point doing it.
Yeah. So what's coming up next then?
So let's see. I've got a short story in the Star Wars from a Certain Point of View Empire Strikes Back anthology,
Cool.
which is out in November. So that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
I'm working on a original novel for once, which who knows? This is the thing, original novels, and I've kind of forgotten. If I handed in the manuscript tomorrow, it's not going to be out for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, whereas a license work is like you hand it in tomorrow, it's out in December.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite cool actually. Knowing it's actually out exactly the next 3-4 months, as opposed to 18 months, must be quite nice. Yeah.
It is, yeah. It's a part of the difference, which is really cool. So yeah, working on that, and then I've got lots of other ideas. Got to keep on working.
Excellent.
Nice.
Would you ever want to, write a screenplay or anything like that? Get into that world?
Yeah, again, it's like if the opportunity came, it's like it's not something I'll look for.
Yeah.
But if the opportunity came, then absolutely. And it goes back to that thing of, I've got stuff that's due and deadlines, so I need to kind of do my work first.
Yeah.
But absolutely, if something came along that was right.
Is there any? Sorry.
Well, I'm lucky in that I can be picky.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to the point now, like especially with tie-in work as well. I don't take every bit of tie-in work that comes along.
Mm-hmm.
I choose what I want to do, which is a great position to be in. And again, it's like stuff that comes in. It's like, well, do I want to do it? Is it worth doing? Is it fun to do?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm aware that that's like, it's a privilege to be able to be in that position.
Yeah. What was the last film that you saw?
Oh my God. I watched The Searchers, which is a 1956 John Wayne Western.
Oh, yeah, the Western.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, John Ford directed it. John Wayne. And because I like doing Westerns for kind of research purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always liked the idea of Westerns. And this is basically the first Western I'd ever actually sat through and watched. And I kind of remain unconvinced at the moment. Like, it looked amazing, wonderful cinematography, and fantastic direction. Because John Ford is, a legend.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of dated and racist and sexist.
There's
kind of things that would be.
It's a fairly recent Western show on Netflix. I can't remember
Godless.
what it's called. Godless, which I thought was fantastic, and that's kind of I guess it looks amazing, but it's very kind of well shot, and it's very modernized, I suppose, in ways I think, as you say, the Westerns and back in the 50s.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's definitely worth a watch if you're for research purposes.
I need to do modern Westerns, I think, because going right back to the 50s might have been my mistake.
Yeah, I enjoy modern Westerns, but I have to say some of the old stuff you kind of watch, maybe even watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a few years ago, and obviously it's a massive, important piece of film, etc. But you're watching it, you're like, God, it's a little bit boring, and you kind of feel bad saying that because it's so famous, but I think, a lot of them don't last.
I think modern Westerns like 3:10 to Yuma, Unforgiven, things like that are, what they're trying to do with the Western is to tell, it is the prism through which you're seeing the Western is a different prism from when they just made Westerns all the time.
That's probably right, exactly, yeah.
And the other thing I was aware of is also that watching The Searchers, which is supposedly one of the greatest films ever made, is that it's from 1954 and 56. That same year, there was probably so many just bog standard Westerns that nobody.
Because they were being pumped out like
exactly.
The number of Westerns per year is nuts back then, wasn't it?
So the very fact that one is still singled out as an example tells you something about the importance of the film and how good it is in relation to the stuff that everybody's forgotten.
Yeah. And what was the last book you read?
This is a good time for this question. I read a book called Can You Speak Venusian by Patrick Moore. Now, Patrick Moore, of course, the astronomer who used to do Sky at Night. So, scientist, astronomer. He wrote this book in about 1972, and it's kind of it's non-fiction, but like he's going around all the kind of slightly strange societies, like the Venusian Intergalactic Parliament and the Atlantean Society and the Flat Earthers,
Right.
and all these kind of groups that existed and probably still
Sort of
exist.
like an early Louis Theroux.
Yeah. Well, the thing, and like he's like talking to them and about their theories and their stories, but he's not. It's not a he's not casting any judgments
Mm.
or arguing or saying they're wrong. He's like he calls them independent thinkers with a capital I and a capital T, and is kind of presenting their beliefs. And like it was absolutely fascinating, like often hilarious.
Awesome.
And obviously it's a long out of print book, but I picked up a second-hand copy. It's worth
Cool.
checking out.
Excellent.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
That's a good question. I'm not sure actually. Yeah, we just watched. The last thing we actually like sat down and watched deliberately was probably Devs.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Um,
That's a fantastic
I've not seen the
show.
end of it, so don't spoil
Oh, I
it.
don't spoil it.
Yeah, that's the kind of like good contemporary science fiction,
Mhm.
which you don't see that often.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I think sci-fi nowadays does seem to be either kind of Star Wars, Star Trek, far future stuff, or I suppose or nothing. I mean, I think things like Arrival or Devs, that kind of
Yeah.
really near future but kind of thoughtful sci-fi. This seems to be quite rare, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think it's difficult to do because you've kind of, I think for a mainstream audience, because you've got this kind of contemporary normal setting,
Mhm.
but you've got this element which is pure science fiction, like the computer system in Devs is completely science fictional, but it's presented in a way that is quite a lot. It's a logical leap from quantum computing, so it's difficult to kind of do that well because that's where the concept has to be right. Otherwise, it can get cheesy pretty quickly, I imagine.
Yeah,
and also it can very quickly get out of date if it's set too close to the future and it doesn't happen that way. Then suddenly it seems very odd.
And the very end of the show, we always end with a quick fire either or. So we always say there's no right or wrong answers, but I'm afraid some questions are actually right or wrong answers. But we'll tell you that when we get to them. So we'll start with the Cumberbatch or Lee Miller Sherlock.
Oh, Lee Miller, come on. I wrote 2 elementary novels.
Well, for the same reason, normally we say Star Wars or Star Trek, but I'm going to change it since you'll say Star Wars for the same reason. I'll say The Expanse or Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Okay.
That was actually the correct answer. So when you've passed that test. TV or cinema?
TV.
And the last one, and this is the one that Tarek gets very angry about, real book or ebook?
Real book.
Oh, we were doing so well, Adam. We were so close, and then we just blown it right at the end of it.
Well, it's like I've tried. I've got a Kindle, like an actual Kindle, and I've tried on my iPad, and I cannot do it. It's just I don't take it in.
Yeah.
But I know people that read nothing but ebooks, so
yeah,
it doesn't matter if you can read it.
Yeah, it's definitely more convenient for holidays. That's the big bonus of ebooks, I would say.
10 books in the backpack.
Well, exactly. Like I've moved house in the UK probably about 5 times, and like when you have to move that many books, it's a drag, man.
Yeah.
So I really wish I could go ebook, but I can't.
Fair enough.
That's
tried.
Interesting, he says he's been doing a lot of Western research for a novel. I wonder what that could be, Marco.
Yeah, indeed. He has announced since we recorded that podcast that he's doing a novel for The Mandalorian, the Star Wars series that's been a big hit on Disney Plus, and that has been compared to sort of old Western style films. It has that sort of narrative
Yeah.
So I suspect that's why he's been doing a lot of Western
Very,
research.
very exciting. I mean, for anyone that's not seen The Mandalorian, I would 100% recommend doing so. It's probably the best Star Wars I've watched for a good few years, probably since
Probably
Force
ever,
Awakens.
to be perfectly honest.
It feels a lot more like the original stuff that I remember watching as a kid. It has that
But
kind of grittiness.
yeah,
It's not as just bombastic. It's a bit more grounded and real.
I don't know. I watched the Star Wars films recently with my kids during lockdown, and I have to say, it's I don't know. Star Wars is something that's always
Okay, Mark,
been.
you have to choose your next words very carefully here.
Star Wars has always been something that's been very important. You know, I've always grew up on it and loved it and stuff. But when you watch the films back again, they are a bit dated, and yeah, there are great moments in them as well. But there's a lot of drag in them as well, and the new films just frankly aren't that good. And The Mandalorian, I think, takes the best bits of Star Wars, which is the world building and the universe and the ideas, and puts it in a much more modern TV show. So even if you're not a massive fan of Star Wars, I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, and it's pretty much standalone. You don't really need to know any Star Wars stuff. It's just its own show, and yeah, as you say, it's more like a Western for sure, and it's fantastic. So definitely check that out, and definitely check out the book when it comes out as well.
Definitely check out Adam's book. We've kind of veered off subject, but
I'm sorry. Who did that one again?
it was a really interesting chat, I thought, there with Adam, and just interesting to hear the differences in the process between his original novels and the franchise tie-ins. And he's right. Sometimes these tie-ins have a bit of a stigma attached to them, but he clearly approaches them with the same love and desire to do a great book.
Yeah.
As he would with any original novel.
Yeah, I mean, we've said before on the podcast that I think there is a real snobbery in certain sectors about types of books, tie-in books or sci-fi books or comics or whatever. Certain pieces of work not having the same amount of worth as other pieces of work, and it's not. I don't really agree with it at all. And it's nice to chat to someone who really feels that at the end of the day, a book is a book, and the enjoyment someone gets from it should not matter whether it's a tie-in novel or it's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel or whatever.
Absolutely not. And The Mandalorian is a good example of a piece of fiction that is set in an existing world, but tells a great story that doesn't need you to have loved the other stuff. So, that's a piece of tie-in television, and tie-in novels can have as much worth and be as good as that, I think.
Exactly.
So thanks very much to Adam for taking the time to come on the podcast. Really enjoyed that chat.
Yeah,
and we
absolutely great.
Look forward to reading The Mandalorian when it comes out. I think it's later this year, he said.
I think so, yeah.
We said at the start of the podcast that we had some exciting news about a new project. We have trailed this on our social media before, but we wanted to try something slightly different by recording some video podcasts with previous guests, but more than one, so it's more of a relaxed discussion. And we're calling these the Page One Sessions, and our first one is with two of our favourite guests from the past, Sarah Pimbra and Tim Leben. And that will be out sometime next week. We're just finalising all the video editing and stuff on that. But we had a great chat with them, and we talked about everything from lockdown and the effect that's had on writing to the work that they're doing just now and what they've got planned for the future.
Yeah, it's a really nice chat, and it's something a little bit different. And if you've ever wondered what your favourite authors or favourite podcasters look like, this is your chance.
Yeah, just remember, it's been locked down, so I've not had a haircut.
Also, I've been eating a lot more food than usual.
And next week we have another great guest, and I think our first Hollywood film director. I'm going to call him a Hollywood film director.
You might be right. Spielberg's not coming on until next season.
I think that's right. Yeah, but we do get a story about Spielberg next week.
We do get a Spielberg story.
Yeah. So our guest next week, and we're very excited about this because we've been a fan for years of Mr. Joe Cornish, who directed Attack the Block. Directed and wrote, I should say, Attack the Block and The Kid Who Would Be King. He also wrote The Adventures of Tintin and Ant-Man, or the first drafts of Ant-Man, with Edgar Wright as well. So we get into all of that. Really interesting chat, and it was interesting talk to someone who writes and then directs their own films, and the difference that has on the creative process. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.